Hi, everyone. Because being on time and consistent is a critically important message that's the basis of everything you do, he told me. I'm not playing Jeopardy with you. I was just thinking about one of the sharp answers my high school rebbeim gave us to our questions. Back then, one of us had come across a medrash whose origin is unknown but is often recited about what the Klal Gadol, what the central message of the Torah is. One idea is that it's Zeh Sefer Toldos HaAdam. The other, Rabbi Akiva chose V'ahavta l'reacha kamocha, loving your neighbor as yourself. But this medrash cited a third pasuk. Es hakeves echad taseh baboker, v'es hakeves hasheni taseh ben harbayim. That the daily korban, the korban atamid, is offered in the morning and the afternoon. That's the underlying principle of the Torah. Now, while the first two psukim seem to be expansive psukim, this one didn't. And so when we asked the Rebbe, he told us that the message was about timeliness and consistency. Timeliness and consistency seem to formulate a good response, I suppose, because in the last 35 years, I have consistently found that the same message being brought or offered by sermonizing rabbis when coming to this parsha and section of the Torah. And yet, did you know that ironically the source of the reminder to be consistent and timely was actually late at the inception in the Beis Hamikdash and almost started a family feud over it? That's right. The Mishnah tells us about the morning after Shlomo HaMelech inaugurated the Beis Hamikdash, when the people were waiting for him to come with the keys to open up. Shlomo HaMelech overslept. The Mishnah describes how the people were sad that they might miss the proper time for the mitzvah. And at that moment, Shlomo HaMelech's mother Bathsheba stepped in and furiously awoke the king, telling him how embarrassed she was going to be, as people were going to blame her for his laziness, and pushed him to move quickly to get out the door to be on time. According to this version, she is the Isha Chayil referred to at the end of Sefer Mishlei, which he composed in her honor for the Tochacha for reproofing and chastising him. It seems odd that the mitzvah of consistency and timeliness would begin with a failure in that very department. Is there a message in that? What might it be? At the same time, the message can't be early, because the Talmud tells us that if one were to begin bringing the korban atamid too early in the morning, it would also be unacceptable. Indeed, once it happened that they thought that it was the proper time, and it turned out to be a mistake, and the korban was ruined since it was brought too early. In fact, part of the service was the checking of the time to see to it that the sun had started to appear over the horizon. The selected Kohen of the day would ask the one standing watch on the roof if he saw the break of dawn, and make sure it was happening all the way to Hebron in his vision. The Talmud notes that Hebron was specifically mentioned in order to include the merit of the Avos and Imos, the patriarchs and matriarchs at Hebron. But honestly, what did they have to do with the korban atamid of the particular day long after they passed? And then there's the text and context of this daily korban. Why does it appear in this week's parsha? Ours is a parsha of personalities, of Pinchas and Zimri and Cosby, of people and families and the census, of the daughters of Tzlafchad and the leadership character in the transfer of power between Moshe and Yoshua. Why is this the parsha to command us about the korban atamid and the others thereafter? But maybe after all of our broad questions will come together when we ask one more technical question. The korban atamid was actually brought in two components, one at the start of the day and the other at the end. The one at the start of the day is mentioned once, while the one in the afternoon is mentioned a second time, 4 psukim later. Why the double mention of the afternoon korban, while the morning one only gets one mention? Kli Yakar suggests that the korban atamid, a korban olah, serves to atone. The korban in the morning atones for the sin of the night, hirhur, or thoughts. At the same time, the one that's brought in the afternoon also serves to atone for both hirhur and thoughts of sin, as well as the actual actions of the sin itself. And so hence it needs a second mention to highlight the fact that it is a second reason for being offered. While we normally don't need to atone for thoughts about doing an Aveira, here we seem to be concerned about them both in the morning and afternoon. Which of the thoughts are we so concerned about that we need to atone for? And while some are quick to point out that the Averos of thought are those of licentiousness and Avodah Zarah, the author of the Chobos Halavavos suggests that it's the thoughts of Hagbahut v'Gava, of haughtiness and arrogance, that need atonement even prior to actually doing an action of Avera because of them. The Ber Moshe adds that he thinks that there's no reason of no difference of opinion here. He points out that the purpose of Karbanos in general is an awareness of Hashem and a hachna or submission to him in the process. Only one who's indeed able to understand obedience to Hashem and display deference to him in the process can be able to actualize the true purpose of bringing the Karbanos. One, or a nation, that gets the idea and reminds itself of the message day in and day out twice a day will develop the ultimate understanding behind all the messages of the Torah, to be in compliance with Hashem in our actions, thoughts, and deeds. And maybe that's why in a parsha brimming with personalities and a census of the people, the Karbanos, Karban Atamid, appear immediately thereafter. The day in and day out bringing of the Karban Atamid was not just a message of timeliness and consistency. It's a message and reminder of the purpose, the real purpose of life, to know Hashem's expectations of us in every moment, and to meet those expectations straight away. And if that's what's on your mind constantly, then all of the mitzvos and the decisions in life become subsumed under the rule. However, if one exists outside of this realm, if one tries to live a life of mutuality with Hashem, where his or her wants and thoughts are taken into account as being equal with those of Hashem, and even at times opposing it, like with Zimri and Cosby, there needs to be a kapara because of a misguided understanding of priority. From the beginning of the bringing of the Karban Atamid in the Beis Hamikdash, this lesson has been underscored, as Shlomo HaMelech allowed his own sleep to be on the same level as Hashem's will. That was unacceptable to his mother, who saw to it that he immediately get with the Karban Atamid program. And prior to the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash, it was the Karban Atamid that needed to be ceased by our enemies in order to see to it that we would no longer atone for forgetting and repair our focus towards our submission of our own desires for the will of Hashem. And so hence one of the great tragedies that we mourned on Shabbos Arba is the loss of the Tamid. You lose the focus of the Karban, and it leads to a total failure of the biggest principles of the Torah. Rabbi Yosef Shalom Elyashiv Zatzal noted that in our times, a generation that we often identify as moments prior to the cracking of the dawn, the Alos HaShachar, from the darkness of Galus, where we were still enshrouded in darkness, we tend to look towards the dawn of the Geula. In these moments, every light that looks like dawn seems to be the one that signifies redemption. Alas, history has shown us that we ought not rush to bring the Tamid, lest we push our agenda before that of Hashem, our own ism before that of Hashem, and ruin the message of the Karban Atamid in the process. The test of a real dawn's early light is if it can be seen as being consistent with the paths of the Avos and Imos and Hebron. If it is, it'll also be consistent with Hashem's intentions as well. So let's be honest. We've all had Shlomo mornings. We oversleep spiritually. We hit the snooze on our tefillos, our learning, our priorities, etc. And twice a day, every day, we were meant to realign, not with our watches, but with Hashem's will, not with our feelings, but with our values. That's what Bathsheba understood. And that's why she woke up Shlomo HaMelech with such a startling start. And that's why the Tamid's absence on Shabbos Arba Tammuz is so tragic. It wasn't the loss of a sheep. It was the loss of our anchor. And so if we want to rebuild a Beis Hamikdash internally or nationally, it starts with our Tamid moments, daily, small, regular choices that say that I don't serve myself. I serve something bigger. And that just might be the biggest klal gadol of them all. Wishing you and yours a Shabbat Shalom and a Shabbat Shalom to all.